spending a summer at a resort, a young woman from a wealthy family falls in love with a poor dance teacher. If that sounds like a typical romance, well, certainly it was a surprise hit for 1987, and since then it's gone on to create a buzz and led to music tours and being referred to as a Star Wars for girls. So once again, I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hi there, everyone.
And I think this time around, one of the questions I feel comes up with these movies is, what is it about something that you can kind of take, like what is normally, I mean, on the surface, almost seems like a cheesy idea, and yet it somehow captures people's imagination and turns out to be a hit. I don't know if you have any thoughts about like kind of what is it about some of these movies?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, Dirty Dancing is kind of one of those quite deceptive sort of films because it seems quite simple as a story. It seems like quite an obvious kind of thing of, someone falling for a dance teacher. But I think what's really clever about Dirty Dancing is all the subtext in it and how some very sort of powerful themes are actually woven into the story in quite clever ways. And I think there's actually quite a few things in this that issues that the writer, I can't remember her first name, but Bergstein is her last name.
Yeah.
She basically made Dirty Dancing almost as a way to prepare teenage girls for what they would have to deal with later on in life. I think that was kind of her general thing. And I think what's clever about this is that the plot relies on these subtext in order to go forward.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's one of those movies that if you're not paying that much attention to it, it seems very simple, but the more you delve into it, the more you realize it's actually pretty complex.
Yeah. And I think,
and please take and just say, in complete opposition to Black Christmas, the recent remake, which had all of its kind of political points laid bare in your face for you to kind of scrutinize. This one does it in a much cleverer, subtler way that actually drives the plot forward.
Yeah, and I think what you say is so true because of the fact that like it really takes people that are committed to making it something more than what could be like it's very cheesecake kind of plot and the action and romance kind of stuff, and kind of delving a little bit into Patrick Swayze's biography and stuff like that. He really was committed to kind of doing something more with this movie. He knew that like in fact for a number of years before that he kind of almost avoided movies that would make him just a teen idol and stuff, and which kind of course led a little bit to when we last talked about him with Red Dawn. That was like a chance for him to work with a director that kind of, on the one hand, was very much kind of silly in other ways and stuff, but at the same time, though, wasn't about him being like this kind of teen heartthrob and stuff. So he was very much concerned about going into this project that it had something more to it, and of course, like you mentioned, kind of with the screenwriter. In fact, I'll grab her name right now. Think about it. Eleanor Bergstein. This was her story. Like, she actually, had this actual experience growing up, and so she was very much she was very passionate and committed to just kind of having her story be told through this, particular, screenplay and stuff. So I think with all that kind of really leads to an interesting point, though, because here we have a movie, star-crossed lovers, class wars, family drama, sexual awakening of a young woman. There's a little bit of everything, but at the same time, it's not, we don't have like a huge kind of heavy delivery of any particular theme and stuff like that too, which like you also pointed out, it's kind of like it's handled in a very subtle kind of way. I think that's the other thing that really makes it kind of stand out in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the most obvious theme in it is the kind of class difference. That's the one that I think the first time I watched it was the one that I really noticed, and that is kind of punctuated by I think if it's Robbie or Neil, one of those characters is reading The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, which is, if people don't know Ayn Rand, she's like very much kind of, well, the people who are the best at things should be running society. So it's very kind of like in favor of elitism, I would say, to some degree, or intellectualism and things like this. So, definitely there's that sort of, and you've got the sort of wealthy Jewish girl with the, the kind of Southern dancer who is struggling to earn his money. So you've got the very sort of clear class difference, and how she's very sort of idealistic and thinks that she can sort of solve every problem, and him and Penny and the others are kind of dealing with just trying to sort of make ends meet, which is a kind of an interesting juxtaposition of both of their attitudes of how they deal with things in life. But I'd say that's the most obvious one for me. Less so was the things like how women treat each other across classes, because this is one thing that people have picked up on over the years, is that there's not really a point where the women are in competition with each other for Johnny, and they kind of have this kind of mutual respect for each other and understanding, even in the difficult situation that like Penny's in. And that's not something you'd often see. Normally you would see sort of women competing over a man or something like this. So that's quite an interesting difference.
Yeah, normally the plots revolve around that, the kind of, classic love triangle thing and stuff. And if anything, the competition, to me was actually for the affections of the father between the two sisters, so that, I think that was like an interesting point, that we see the rivalry there, and different times, like, one of the pointed moments was when, she was planning to sneak out and everything. And so she, baby wants to sneak out. And then she says to the sister, like, or the sister says, well, I'll tell them, kind of that you've been sneaking out. And she says, well, they're not going to believe you because, I never lie, like kind of, and I think that's kind of like an interesting kind of shows like kind of the dynamic within that family, and, like how they each had their kind of role. And I think that's another part of all this too, is like kind of that we see like the mother, we see the sisters and stuff like that, that the mother's got her role, the sisters have theirs, and they're, about to step into that world of playing another role, that they'll be wives, and then of course mothers and stuff like that. And I think that's an interesting time frame too, because the movie's set in the 60s, where that's still like kind of more or less, like that's what's interesting, is like we see like kind of that, and the thing is briefly mentioned, and we'll get into the remake, that it's more overt about kind of how things are changes in the air. And right now, though, in this kind of moment in time, that's all kind of outside of that.
Yeah, I think Bergstein described it as this was like the last of the most liberal points before JFK got shot.
Right.
And before various other things happened. I can't remember what they were now, but yeah, I mean, that point is definitely comes across. And I think you're right in terms of the father is much more integral to between the two sisters, and how they view him and what they're sort of going through, because you have very much the journey of baby from like the baby who's like the daddy's girl, who then sort of points out not only kind of his hypocrisy, but also very much a kind of middle class wealthy hypocrisy, that it's okay to save people as long as they're not like, as long as they're the people you approve of. Which is again kind of goes back to the whole sort of class differentiator as well.
Yeah, there's no sign of, I mean, I think there were some, colored, dancers in the kind of scene with the this crew, right, or the staff and everything like that. So you can only imagine that, like, the African Americans, or kind of, they would probably like working in the kitchens and stuff like that, because you never see them anywhere like on the grounds and stuff like that. But there they were in that one scene. The Hispanic, and on and on, like kind of, and so it's interesting how in a way that's really just portraying this bubble that is this time frame in the 60s where the kind of, quote unquote lower classes don't really exist, especially those who are outside, of your race and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, she makes the point as well, like Patrick Swayze's character is kind of portrayed as this plaything for sort of the rich older women,
right?
Who, and so it's kind of, again, it's this kind of disposability of the lower classes, which is likewise you can also say is kind of with Penny's character as well, in that she's kind of seen as someone who you can have sex with and then get rid of by Robbie.
Right.
So there's a lot of themes in it to do, and struggle.
That leads to an interesting point, though, that in a way too, sensuality probably like hasn't really changed for that. I would say that like we have this idea, or somehow it kind of shows up different ways like that a good girl, if you will only do this and stuff, and that's something that like we've had kind of the coming sexual liberation that like it really is not really covered here in the movie stuff, but what's reflected though is that like there's a very vanilla attitude towards sex and stuff, and where like just in the name of the movie itself, right, Dirty Dancing is about this kind of very sensual dance and stuff that like when Patrick Swayze's Johnny's teaching the dance and stuff, it's a very kind of rigid kind of almost mechanical kind of thing, right, the cha-cha-cha whatever thing, but then when they're on their own, there's this kind of very passionate kind of almost like the forbidden kind of dance, if you will, and stuff that they can do and stuff, and it's not something that they were ever going to teach any of these guests and stuff like that, heaven forbid, because that would just be scandalous to kind of have something like that in the open. So except for, of course, the closing number, which again, spoiler and all that like it's a big finale and kind of kind of brings it all kind of together, and to me, like it's funny how here, even though it's not overtly portrayed that way, that kind of final moment is like kind of the showdown between Johnny and the class structure, I guess, if you will, right? It's like he and Baby are just basically like kind of they're joining hands, and like kind of this is their showdown moment with the class structure, and like that us taking on the world kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point you made there about the nature of the dancing, of what they actually have to do professionally and what they do in their free time. The contrast of the mechanical dancing and the very strict stuff for the performance, and the actual freedom that they have in their private lives. And I think that's kind of, I wonder, whether that's how she's trying to sort of allude to that is somewhat how sort of sex is portrayed perhaps in society, or maybe it was in the 60s or something like that. It's it's kind of a very interesting kind of contrast there, the two different things. One thing I will say, that just a totally sort of side note thing is, I do think A Time of Your Life is the least best suited song to dance the mambo to. It's like it just doesn't seem like anything you could ever dance a mambo to. It's just bereft of all Latin influence, so it's a really strange choice. I mean, it's good as a dramatic thing, and it's very
right,
but it just doesn't make any sense in terms of the context, I don't think. But.
And that's another aspect about all this too, is that like I think why it works though is because something that was Latin, right, would not work with a general population and stuff like that. Does that make sense? Like like what you're appealing to that moment, even though like what you said very much makes it where that's a great kind of example of how we have this kind of contradiction. On the one hand, they're doing a Latin dance, like, so you would think that to be authentic, they would do like a Latin, use Latin music and stuff like that. But the movie itself is for a very non-Latin audience. I mean, that's the reality itself for the most part.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit kind of whitewashed a little bit. You see
just
that?
A bit.
But,
just a bit,
yeah. The other thing I was going to ask was, in terms of the dancing, comparing to the 2016 version, which had the dirtier dancing?
Oh, I mean,
In
there's
your
no
opinion?
comparison. Like I don't know much about the actor Corey, I think is his name, that was it in the remake and stuff. But the thing is though that like I mean, he on the surface has the looks of a Johnny and stuff like that. Like to me, like if you kind of just said like, oh, we need to kind of slick looking kind of dance instructor or something like that, somebody like that would come to mind. But what he really lacks though is like that kind of soul that like even though here's what's funny also, that like Patrick Swayze was way before he became an actor. He was a professionally trained dancer. That was like I want to say that he was not Juilliard trained, but he was like kind of basically at that level in the New York scene and stuff like that. But it was
a
ballet
dancer.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And he was
a professional ballet dancer.
And he was all that before any acting. So to me, what's kind of funny is that like even though like he pulls off like these kind of very much Latin kind of rhythms and that kind of thing, it's not from that background though. And I think what it is because of the choreographer that they had at that time, who did have that background, that they were able to kind of mesh the two worlds. But still, it had to come from the fact that like he was a professionally trained dancer, that he could pick up on these. And from what I understand, with the the 2017 version, Colt Prattes, I think is his name. He just like I think he I think he has some kind of dance background, but I don't think he has nearly the depth though. And that's to me what I think kind of comes across.
And I mean, from what I understand, Jennifer Grey really didn't have much dancing background.
Oh no, she didn't
quite
at all.
There's quite a lot of authenticity in her journey, and she does a great job, to be honest. Going from someone who's completely amateur, she did a fantastic job towards the end.
The challenge I was gonna say, the challenge you get into is that like you have to like on the one hand show, like you said, the journey, but the other, by the end though, they've got to reach a level of proficiency that's pretty high actually.
And I mean, they shot the whole thing in 44 days, from what I understand. So they really didn't. She did pretty remarkable in that with given the constraints. And I mean, also I think really what's interesting about this movie is that really she is the central character, and everything is very much focused on her. And in a way that's kind of like a nice kind of poetic commentary on dancing, in a way, in that it's always this idea that the man leads, but it's really the woman who's the show in these sort of dances like tango and stuff. And that's kind of what you kind of feel is also being represented in this movie. Patrick Swayze is very professional and rigid and everything else, and he's kind of like but she is the main sort of character that all the drama revolves around, so to speak. So it's kind of a very I don't know how by design that was, but it just seems to sort of come together in that way quite cleverly.
Yeah, and I think that's also partially why it appeals so much, because I wouldn't say that like like just like how we introduced it, that it became like this kind of Star Wars for girls, like kind of like very much how of course the story of Jedi's kind of really appeals to young boys and stuff like that. This story, I think, with her being the central character, just appealed to these young women who were, and that was the writer's intent, right? That she wanted to kind of basically, like you said, have this story help women kind of find their way in a sense. And I think she really achieved that. She kind of in a way, even if she didn't dive too deeply into the issues, but I think what she does do a good job of is like kind of showing that like, oh, like you're not alone. I think that's the essential thing that she does achieve in terms of the story.
Well, I think it's very charming as well, having someone to show a real human side. They show the kind of messing up and sort of screwing things up and making Johnny angry because she's not as good as he wants her to be, and but also the sort of the vulnerability with the various situations with her father. But she kind of comes through, and it's quite a strong character at the end. Actually, she stands up for herself against her dad, against other men, and kind of it's really quite a journey she goes on, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she really goes through a hero's journey, and that's really what it is. And like that's another kind of parallel to Star Wars and stuff, because she starts off in her ordinary world of being baby and stuff like that, and she goes through these things like Johnny's her kind of guide to this other world, and it just like kind of certainly the sex part kind of has to come into it and stuff like that, and that's certainly something that like that's definitely one key difference from Star Wars, of course. But
Luke and Obi-Wan Kenobi, spoiler alert, they don't get it on during Star Wars.
No.
There's no dirty Jedi action, unfortunately.
Right.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
That's really what it is. And like that's another kind of parallel to Star Wars and stuff, because she starts off in her ordinary world of being baby and stuff like that, and she goes through these things like Johnny's her kind of guide to this other world, and it just like kind of certainly the sex part kind of has to come into it and stuff like that, and that's certainly something that like that's definitely one key difference from Star Wars, of course. But
Luke and Obi-Wan Kenobi, spoiler alert, they don't get it on during Star Wars.
No.
There's no dirty Jedi action, unfortunately.
Right.
I mean, one thing I will say is, as we've been doing these movies, I often kind of like check out the feminist analysis of a lot of these movies, because it's quite interesting to see that kind of vantage point. Not normally they kind of tear most movies to pieces. Dirty Dancing, not a word. It's basically held up as like a feminist masterpiece from all most accounts I read. Not a bad word could be found about it anywhere.
That is really interesting, though. It kind of makes sense in a way, because it's a very like, if nothing else, that we talk about it being kind of cheesy in some ways, but it's written by a woman. It's kind of the story of a woman, stuff like that. And even though that like the director is a man and stuff, like I think he really worked to stay true to form to the writer's vision, that he didn't really like in other words, I don't think there's really any unnecessary male flashes of like like that, like you don't see how like a lot of movies where like Zack Snyder kind of included in that, where if it's like his version of Wonder Woman, you're going to see like as much skin as possible, like kind of versus in the the latest version of Wonder Woman, it's a very much showing a strong kind of woman that is a powerful kind of character and stuff like that, and I feel like that's in some ways that what we see with Baby, and like you said, how she faces her father, faces like kind of just the different other challenges that throughout the movie and stuff.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of heavy themes. There's this really sort of nice balance of heavy themes and light-hearted kind of moments, or sort of charming moments between Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze, because you've got abortion being illegal in the 60s and how that's dealt with. That kind of the shame, the potential that Penny could have lost her job. And how do you actually deal with that? The fact that she had to borrow the money and everything else. But what's interesting as well is that Penny's peers and Baby don't judge her for it, which is you don't see any of those characters sort of like passing any judgment, which is probably, and I'm guessing probably still quite rare to see in a movie. Likewise, there's the whole deal with Robbie and consent. And what part does that play? Because there's bits where he's sort of crossing the line, and that sort of again is a kind of, I feel that's like her kind of preparation manual for young women, sort of saying you might get yourself into this kind of situation, and how do you deal with that? So it's
And for that also, it's interesting how the conclusion that was reached by the dad initially is that Johnny was the one that knocked up Penny and stuff, versus who actually was. And also when there was the kind of the theft of the wallet and stuff, that you know, he had to be the one that was guilty because of the class thing again. That, oh, it couldn't possibly be like kind of, you know, the nice elderly couple and stuff like that who were guests and everything.
Mm.
And so again, we had this kind of thing of where if you are a lower class, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. If anything, you tend to be like, you know, the more likely kind of villain, stuff like that. And you know, and again, like we're just talking class. Even we're not even talking about race and everything. You know, you can only imagine like if, you know, Johnny was a African American dancer. I mean, you know, forget it. Like kind of, you know, I mean, he probably would have just run on the rail like kind of just as soon as any of this stuff popped up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess I think we've covered most of the major sort of things in the 87 version. So perhaps we should move on to how it compares. It's time, isn't it?
It's time.
We get to 26.
I feel like in a way we probably, the sense I have is like we kind of almost don't, we cringe at like kind of wanting to compare it, but that's kind of why we're here. So let's start. I mean, let's get down to it.
So, one thing, I mean, Neil as a character is a lot less obnoxious than he is in the 87 version.
Right.
But he's almost unrealistically woke. It's like he's so kind of pro women that it's just almost completely unrealistic for 1962.
I was gonna say, like was it real though? Was it like kind of just, you know, him putting on this act? You know, like that's right away how it almost comes across that like he wants to like look woke. He wants to look like, you know, like, oh, I'm a very, you know, kind of modern kind of guy and stuff. You know, I'm very hip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I feel like that's almost what he's portraying. Like, you know, the actor, he's portraying like kind of this, that different guys like want to, you know, have the appearance of kind of being like, you know, kind of feminist power kind of thing.
I don't know. Would you even? I'm not even sure someone would be that clever to try and be that hip in 1963. I'm not sure, but anyway.
Right. That's a good point.
I mean, I quite like the leading lady in it, because she was in Little Miss Sunshine when she was younger, which I quite enjoyed. I thought that was a cool movie. I thought she was pretty good in this from what I saw. Full disclosure to the audience, my movie crashed about towards the end of it, so I didn't actually see the finale, but I saw most of the first half. But I thought she was okay. I'm not sure she did as good a job as Jennifer Grey in the dancing.
And I feel like the biggest weakness is that you put these two up together, right? This Johnny and Baby versus like Jennifer Grey, Patrick Swayze. And it's like, I mean, not only apples and oranges, but it's like, I'd say like a different plant species and kind of, you know, in terms of just in terms of like, again, it's not the level of acting. It's just the fact that like, they're just not the dynamic. And I think, you know, one of the things that was kind of made a point of like kind of is that like on the set of Red Dawn, you know, Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze had a lot of tension, and almost in a way that like, you know, they started off with the movie, you know, Dirty Dancing, that they had that, and kind of it actually gave them something, a spark to kind of build off of. And over time, they kind of just discovered that kind of romance. So I feel like that came across on the screen, the transition from that tension to chemistry.
Yeah, because apparently Patrick Swayze was not happy about Jennifer Grey being cast in that.
Well, to a degree, you know, apparently, like, you know, part of it was that like she seems like a little bit of this kind of giggly kind of you know, girl, stuff like that, and you know, really seemed to just lack that kind of the dedication that he thought he, you know, was looking for, and and you know, again, that's kind of did come across. But I think it just added to that tension that like that at least there was something there that then when things kind of developed, that then there was this kind of respect watching her actually work hard, that like, you know, that he realized like, you know, she was starting from ground zero, but she was committed to you know, really getting better. And she was like kind of, that's the thing that like he said in his biography, that like you know, when he started seeing like kind of that she was serious about the role, that she was, you know, how hard she was working. And, you know, in fact, even I guess in some of the, you know, outtakes, whatever, you kind of see her like tripping on her feet and kind of just really just getting frustrated. So that I think really came across, that she was really doing her best, and at the same time, then as time went on, the work did pay off and everything. And I feel like that's something that like was not, that we don't see that in the new one. I mean, I have no doubt that Amy Breslin, you know, she was a hardworking actress and stuff, but there's just not that kind of, I don't feel like there was that transition that like that there was any kind of tension or anything that kind of where there was any kind of on-screen sparks and stuff. And, you know, certainly like actors are people and you can't kind of automatically create it. But then to me, then it's up to the director and the casting people, all that kind of stuff, to somehow figure out like, you know, what is it, match that works and stuff. And I feel like that was like one of the, probably the biggest weakness of the whole thing.
I can tell you what my biggest weakness was.
Okay.
And that was that the characters were singing in this one, but not a microphone inside. It was kind of like, it went from being something where they're performing dance to it's like a Broadway show where they're trying to do like a singing number.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're magically just sounding perfectly produced with no microphones inside. It just really, that just completely threw it out, all realism out of the window for me, and made me remember I was watching a TV movie. Likewise, the definition of dirty dancing in 1987 seems to involve lots of pelvic thrusting, whereas in 2017 it seems to involve lots of people spending time on the floor. Like all the dancing, there was people sprawled out over the floor or being thrown on the floor half the time, and it's like, yeah, is that really dirty, or is that just sort of like weird floor work going on?
Right.
There was a lot of that, and it was just very interesting to see. It's almost like it's 2017. How can we make this more dirtier, or let's have more people writhing around on the floor?
Right.
It was very sort of odd choice for me. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess they were getting dirty in the sense that they were just picking up, you know, kind of stuff off the floor.
yeah.
Maybe they didn't understand the concept that like, we don't mean like physically dirty. We mean like sexually dirty.
Yeah. You're not mop. Yeah.
And again, spoiler alert and stuff, the ending, like just the way that it was kind of like this, but this was actually a show within a show or play within a play. And, you know, it's this Broadway production, and here we have them in their life afterwards and stuff. I feel like the power of the original was the fact that like they kind of had the ending where it was, and like kind of, you know, and, you know, a little bit of voiceover kind of talked about, you know, how it was a memory, stuff like that. But they didn't, I mean, this is another place where like, generally speaking, I'm all for like show, don't tell and stuff like that. But here they were showing things that like, I mean, you know, how did that add to the story? I mean, I feel like that's really the big question about like the odd choices of like kind of having this Broadway play and like showing like, you know, that here baby's now an adult, she has a family and stuff like that. I mean, we like we talked about with horror at different times, leaving it to the imagination has more power rather than like showing her with this family. We kind of all imagine that she would have a family and stuff like that, but why show this stuff? You know, like kind of what did it do to really like kind of lend to the story?
Yeah, I think as well, it's a bit like, you know, where you take one sort of abstracted layer towards the end of your story, it always just feels like a bit of a cop out. You know, it's kind of a bit like with Scrooged in the, you know, he's there talking to the audience right at the end, and it kind of, you know, nothing really resolves properly. You know, it's kind of, yeah, that can often be seen as a bit of a cop out, but yeah. So, any other major criticisms of the 2017? I've said everything I needed to say. I just didn't like the singing. I didn't really like the dancing.
I think overall, just the fact that like they felt the need to spell things out, and then like you said, it just really smacked of like kind of the same problems with Black Christmas, where, you know, like kind of it's just, to me, what it shows is a lack of trust of the audience to draw their own conclusions, and to leave things for the imagination, just like where just some things are better to, like kind of left unshown, I guess.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we probably need to mention is just how like Patrick Swayze nearly put his back out lifting up Jennifer Grey on that famous scene where you see them in the water, and he's saying, well, lifts are actually easier in the water. Yeah, she said, well, actually people are about 5 times heavier in the water. It actually makes it way more difficult. And apparently that lake was virtually freezing. So yeah, I thought it was quite funny.
Because even though like they were portraying summer, this was like already fall, and like they were like literally apparently like the set designers were painting the leaves of the like on the grounds of green, and like I mean, because this is fall, like so the water had to be damn cold, like so yeah, it just kind of again I think like just it all lends back to like kind of the dedication that these folks had for that production. And kudos on them. It really came across. So, coming up, I think we'll probably be covering in the next episode. We'll be doing Button Bun, otherwise known as The Box, in terms of the remake. We've also got Evasion Body Snatchers, a few episodes coming up, but I think before that we'll be doing Stepford Wives, which it'll be interesting to kind of see the similarities between those 2 movies or series.
Yeah, looking forward to all of those.
So once again, I'm John Chang with Dad Edmonds. Thanks for watching.
Thanks very much.
And be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.